The DJ had just dropped the beat for the biggest song of the night, and the gym at Northwood High was a blur of flashing lights and expensive, shimmering dresses. Then, everything seemed to freeze. Lila, standing near the punch table in her favorite deep blue velvet dress, felt a wave of icy cold wash over her. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was Chad, the unofficial king of the school and captain of the hockey team, who had just stepped onto the stage, grabbing the microphone right out of the DJ's hands. The music died completely. 70 pairs of eyes locked onto him. Chad flashed his perfect, expensive-looking smile, but his eyes were cruel. "Hey, everyone. Sorry to interrupt this epic party," he called out, his voice echoing through the massive audio system. "But I just wanted to give a little shout-out to someone who really went all out tonight." He pointed directly at Lila. A low, nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs, her mouth suddenly dry. She knew that look. "Check out Lila here," Chad continued, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "That dress is bold. Like, real bold. We all appreciate you trying, Lila, but maybe next time, save the tent-sized attire for, a tent. It's a dance, not a buffet." The gym erupted, not with laughter, but with a few snickers quickly drowned out by gasps of shock. It was a vicious act of public body shaming, a casual display of prejudice Chad always got away with. Lila, whose biggest dream was to go to university to study business and finally get a good job, felt her entire world tilt. Tears welled up, blurring the bright lights. She didn't have to hear the insults about her weight or her confidence to know what he meant. She just wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Chad was about to continue his harassment when the massive front doors of the gymnasium slammed open. Everyone, including a smug Chad, whipped their heads around. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dark Canadian night, was a man in a flawless designer suit. He was tall, with a strong, unfamiliar presence, and he looked furious. He took one slow, deliberate step inside, and a hush fell over the crowd. "I think," the man's deep voice boomed, cutting through the silence like a knife, "you just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic, privileged life." Who was this stranger? How did he get in? And why was he so angry? Build up, tell the story leading up to the main event. We have to rewind to understand how Lila got to this moment. Lila wasn't just a student at Northwood High, she was an academic star, focusing on finance and marketing. She was kind, quiet, and kept to herself, mainly because of bullies like Chad. Chad, whose family was wealthy from a global enterprise in tech infrastructure, considered himself untouchable. He enjoyed making others feel small. Lila had been excited about the dance. Not just as a fun night, but as a small act of defiance. She'd struggled with her confidence, but this year, she'd saved up her money from her part-time job to buy the dress she felt beautiful in. Her mother, a single parent who worked long hours at an international corporation just to cover the mortgage and Lila's tuition fees, had told her, "Wear it proudly, sweetie. Don't let anyone dim your light." The subtle tension started 2 days earlier in the school library. Chad and his friends were loudly complaining about a low grade in their advanced placement, AP, economics class. Lila, who tutored students in the class, had overheard them. "It's unfair," Chad complained. "My dad could buy this whole school's real estate if he wanted. I deserve an A." Lila had quietly corrected him, pointing out that his failure was due to not understanding the risk management principles on the final. Chad had sneered, "Oh, look who it is. Miss Finance. Why don't you stick to eating your feelings, Lila, and leave the important stuff to people who actually have a future?" That nasty comment had stung, planting a seed of revenge in Chad's shallow heart. Now, 2 days later, he was executing his cruel plan at the dance, determined to break her spirit in front of everyone. Lila, still frozen with shame and shock, looked up at the man in the doorway. He was walking toward the stage with long, powerful strides. The air crackled with a dangerous energy. Chad, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely confused and a little scared. "Who are you?" Chad stammered, his bravado finally cracking. "Security. Get this guy out of here." The man ignored Chad completely. He stopped right in front of the stage, his eyes, dark and intense, fixed only on Lila. Then, in a smooth, elegant motion, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small, gold-embossed card. He flipped it open and held it up for Chad and the entire room to see. On it, in crisp, bold lettering, was the logo of the Fortune 500 company that sponsored the very school event, Omnicorp Global. Below the logo was a name and a title, Elias Thorne, CEO. Elias Thorne, the youngest and most powerful chief executive officer in the country, was standing in their high school gym. But why? He looked back at Lila, a soft, protective expression replacing the anger. "Lila," he said, his voice now gentle but carrying immense weight. "It's time to go. Your mother is waiting." He had mentioned her mother. The crowd went silent again. If this was the CEO of Omnicorp, what was his connection to Lila and her single mom? Why did he interrupt a high school dance? And what was he going to do about Chad? Elias Thorne, the impossibly rich and powerful CEO of Omnicorp Global, had just revealed his identity, creating a silence so thick you could almost hear the Canadian dollars dropping in Chad's pocket. He repeated his calm, gentle instruction to Lila, "It's time to go. Your mother is waiting." Lila was still reeling, but the shame that had crippled her moments ago was starting to be replaced by a furious confusion. She didn't understand. She barely knew this man. Chad, however, was starting to sweat through his expensive athletic wear. His father's investment firm held several important contracts with Omnicorp. Corporate snobbery was a game he understood. "Mr. Thorne, sir," Chad stammered, his voice suddenly small and shaky. I was just making a harmless joke. Just school spirit. I didn't know you were here." Elias Thorne turned his steely gaze onto Chad. The CEO's face was unreadable, but his eyes were filled with a cold, professional disappointment that was far worse than any rage. "A harmless joke, you say?" Thorne's voice was low, yet it commanded the entire gym. "You publicly humiliated an outstanding young woman, a brilliant scholar, who is also working hard to secure her financial future and that of her family. You did this because you believe your family's wealth gives you the right to demean others. That is not a joke, Chad. That is a display of prejudice and a spectacular lack of integrity." He paused, letting his words sink in. He looked at the student body, his voice rising in power. "You all should know why I'm here. Lila's mother, a woman who has worked 2 jobs to keep this family afloat, is one of my most valued and trusted senior executives at Omnicorp. She has just accepted a massive promotion, Executive Vice President of Operations for North America." A fresh wave of gasps swept through the gym. Lila's mom? An EVP at a Fortune 500 company? The underdog wasn't just the girl being bullied, it was her entire family about to make a massive comeback. This evening, Thorne continued, his eyes back on a now ashen Chad, was supposed to be a surprise celebration for Lila. "Her mother is waiting with the full Omnicorp board of directors and our legal team at a private dinner. We were going to announce the Lila Scholarship Fund, a multi-million-dollar initiative investing in promising students right here at Northwood, with Lila as the inaugural recipient." This reveal was a complete emotional high. Lila's mind raced. Her mother's long hours, the whispered phone calls about salary negotiations and performance bonuses, it all made sense. They were escaping their financial struggles. Elias Thorne then delivered a low that was solely for Chad. He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times. "Mr. Worthington, your father, just received a very urgent email. You see, integrity and respect are core values at Omnicorp. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and racism, and that extends to the families of our executives. As of 5 minutes ago, Omnicorp has terminated all contracts with your father's firm, citing a major ethical breach involving his heir. The cost of this termination to his company will be in the tens of millions of dollars. Chad looked like he might pass out. His expensive suit suddenly looked cheap. His corporate snobbery had just cost his family a fortune. This was brutal, immediate poetic justice. Lila finally stepped forward. She didn't look at Chad, she looked at the crowd. Her face, no longer hidden by shame, was a picture of quiet dignity. The humiliation was still real, but she now had the strength of an empire behind her. "Mr. Thorne," Lila said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you. But before we go, I have one thing to say." She walked toward the microphone that Chad had dropped. Picking it up, she looked directly at the bully. "Chad," she stated, her voice amplified for the whole school to hear. "The tent you talked about? It was a tent of protection for me and my mom. It was the clothes I felt strong in. You were cruel because you felt small. But the world doesn't stop for people who just stand on their parents' money. It rewards those who actually work." She smiled, a genuine, beautiful smile that erased the memory of his nasty words. "You wanted to know who walked in next. It wasn't just a CEO. It was the future of someone you tried to crush." Elias Thorne clapped once, sharply, and the sound echoed. "Well said, Lila." He offered her his arm. As they walked toward the door, every single student in the gym, except for Chad and his stunned friends, started to cheer. It was an ovation for an underdog comeback like no other. Lila, leaning on the arm of one of the most powerful men in the country, walked out of the gym, leaving the dance behind. She wasn't running away, she was walking into a new, brighter future. The doors closed quietly behind them, leaving Chad alone on the stage, stripped of his power, facing the consequences of his arrogance. The music eventually started again, but the balance of power at Northwood High had shifted forever. And that's the end of the story, Stories Mike viewers. A massive win for Lila and her mom. What was your favorite moment of poetic justice? Let me know your city in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for more true stories about underdog comebacks.